Welcome to the Put On Waivers Media Group, home of the Put On Raiders podcast and the Student Body Right podcast. This is your place for the best breakdowns and the best insight for those who fight on and bleed silver and black. Now, here are your hosts, Dwayne Douglas and Ryan Holmes.
Welcome to another glorious episode of the Put On Raiders podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Douglas, along with Ryan Holmes. And, you know, the beautiful shores of Southern California are blazing hot. Blazing hip-hop and R&B out here. It's hot. No question about it. So everybody, have the AC's on in my house, driving me crazy. SDG&E, that bill's gonna be crazy this month. But, hey, gotta keep the little kids cold. As far as that goes, the Raiders are ready to start their season. It seems like forever before this weekend to come. You have Sam Gordon from the Las Vegas Review-Journal to kind of take us through a little bit with the Raiders. First question, can you talk about the Raiders and just the Aces and how, like, you know, Vegas, it used to be like, no way a sports team goes there. Yeah. Now it seems like everybody wants to go to Vegas now, right?
Yeah, no, definitely, guys. First and foremost, want to thank you guys for having me on the show today. But yeah, when I got here, just a little bit of context, I got here at first in 2016, and the sports scene, you know, there was UNLV, there was combat sports, and there was high schools. It was, and then you had, you know, different events and whatnot. But there was no pro sports presence, and just in the last 4 or 5, 6 years here, completely transformed, right? Golden Knights, then the Aces come, and then of course Mark Davis and the Raiders come here. Mark Davis buys the Aces, and now the Aces are in the finals. The Raiders have revamped their front office and their roster and their coaching staff, and you have a lot of, I would say, synergy going on right now, Dwayne, just in Vegas with the NFL season starting with the Aces in the finals, and it's completely transformed. It's totally different now than it just was, you know, five years ago. Drastically different, but in a good way, in a positive way. There's a lot of momentum building here, and it's just strengthened the landscape of Las Vegas as the city continues to evolve.
The impact of this new coaching staff. We knew when Gruden was gone, they were going to do something big with the coaching staff. What are your thoughts about that McDaniel hire coming over?
Yes, I mean, so far, I think so good if you're a Raiders fan, right? You get the sense that there's more structure. There's just practices are tighter. Everything's a little bit more efficient. Everything's done with a little bit more direction and just kind of urgency, you would say. I think just even in training camp, kind of one of the things that we picked up on right away is, and this was even before training camp and OTAs and whatnot, as McDaniels and his staff are coming trying to establish their culture. You have players running laps and doing sprints and stuff when they would make mistakes. Mistakes isn't things that would lead to penalties during games, right? One of the first things I think I noticed about training camp in the preseason is the Raiders were, you know, they only had, I think, 13 penalties the entire preseason or something like that. So, you know, drilling the fundamentals. There's been an emphasis on the fundamentals that keep teams from beating themselves. And that was definitely a point of emphasis, I think, with McDaniels and this staff that Gruden didn't have. The Raiders were one of the most penalized teams in the league last year, and that's a designation that it's not unlikely for the Raiders. It's been that way for quite some time. So I think that's kind of been the first order of business. And then you talk about, you know, scheme and personnel. Well, you have Derek Carr and now Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller and, of course, Devontae Adams. It's going to be super interesting to see what he does there. I think just from what we've seen in training camp, you know, this has potential to be a top 5 offense. I don't think there's any kind of secret around that, but that is also a touch that I think, you know, has been added by having the McDaniels-Ziegler, you know, combo. Is they're aggressive. There's an aggressive mentality here in the approach to this season, and you're seeing that already play out. So we'll see how it goes. Right? This is the most competitive division in football, or one that I anticipate being the most competitive division. And the Raiders have definitely reframed their approach with McDaniels and company going into the season.
Yeah, definitely, Sam. I think it was 13 penalties for 95 yards in 4 games, which as a Raider fan, I don't ever remember seeing, you know, 3 penalties a game in my lifetime, and I'm in my mid-40s. But, you know, I saw the article recently about McDaniels trying to step out of Belichick's shadow. Why do you think he's going to succeed this second time around? What's the biggest thing that drew him away from New England and to coach the Raiders? Because he's had plenty of opportunities to leave New England. He just hasn't done it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a great point. I think in between head coaching stints, he of course wanted to find what he would characterize as the right opportunity. And here, he comes with Dave Ziegler. They're empowered to kind of put their imprint on this team, both personnel wise and scheme wise. It's you have Mark Davis, from an ownership standpoint, willing to be aggressive. And I think as we saw this offseason, in his approach, I think that's probably something that certainly appealed to Josh McDaniels. And then in terms of this time around, what's going to be, I think he just, he's matured. He's matured as a coach. I think there was a little bit of too much trying to emulate the Patriot way in Denver the first time around. And when you have, 9, 10, 11 years to kind of grow, to experience different things, to experience varying levels of success, I think there's, probably a little bit of a loss of ego in that with Josh McDaniels as well. Now, that's just kind of what I've seen from my perspective, covering the team so far under his tenure. But it feels like you're getting a more measured Josh McDaniels, somebody who has more self-awareness and kind of understands what, has a better understanding of what the role of a head coach is. So again, you've already seen some of the imprints. I think he's just more refined. He's just more polished, 10, 11, 12 years later compared to how he was with this stint in Denver. And again, so far, right, like you said, Ryan, right, the early returns, you can't take much from I don't think you can take a ton from the preseason, but you are seeing a more disciplined football team, one that is executing better, and one that is already, quite different than the one we saw, last season.
Yeah, discipline. I'm all for that as a fan. I don't like seeing those yellow flags. I guess the question I'd have is, I know we didn't see penalties in the preseason games, but during the practices when they have officials out there, are they also pretty clean? You're not seeing a ton of flags out there as well?
I mean, there was an evolution period, right? I think, that it's not going to be perfect all the time, but yeah, it has been relatively clean at practice, all things considered, right? And yeah, I think it goes back to that, kind of accountability piece, that you are seeing more accountability with the players amongst themselves, with the coaches and the players, and just kind of the expectations have changed. Like this is what the McDaniels coaching staff is about. They want to minimize turnovers, which have, again, historically been an issue for Raider teams, even were a little bit of an issue, I thought, last season, despite, some of the success. You want to limit the penalties. You want to limit the turnovers. Those things, I think, are relatively kind of manageable variables to the best of your ability. Now, will it look a little differently, right, when you see the first team O-line against some of the first team defenses and, how those matchups play out? Will some penalties? I don't know. It's too soon to say. But again, I think the early returns from what you've seen so far, much different than what we saw under the Gruden regime.
Speaking of offensive line, what are your thoughts about, Carmen Basillo, the offensive line coach, you had to think that he and Josh McDaniels working in concert to make sure that everything's working well, because that's a big part of what they want to do, right? They want to run the football. They want to make big plays down the field and in the short game as well. What are your thoughts about the decisions they've made and to not bring in a veteran right tackle?
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely thought bringing in a veteran would be a possibility, especially, kind of as you saw how things were playing out in training camp with Alex Leatherwood. I think the message has been pretty consistent, is that they're going to, put the best team on the field, the best possible team on the field this season. And, yes, there were some, financial consequences, but the Bears did a little bit of a favor in terms of picking up Leatherwood and taking care of some of that money. But in terms of the situation on the offensive line, definitely the biggest, I think, talking point or biggest question mark that this team has. I think the decision not to bring a veteran in shows a lot of confidence in Thayer Munford, the seventh rounder out of Ohio State. He does have a pedigree. He played in the Big Ten. He was a two-time, all Big Ten first team selection, and he's looked good when he's been out there. I think, especially in comparison to some of his peers at that position. So will he be ready week one? I don't know. All right. I think you saw Jermaine Illuminor elevated to that right tackle spot in the latest depth chart. But there is a sense that they do believe he can develop into a starter at the right tackle spot, perhaps sooner than later. It's a younger group. I think that the average age on that offensive line, I believe, is 25. So there's a lot that this offensive line needs to improve. But at the same time, I do respect, the approach by the coaching staff and by the front office. They are going with the group that they feel it gives them the best opportunity to win right now, regardless of how that plays out in the future with cap concerns. And then maybe depending on how things go, maybe when the season starts, you adjust and go trade for a veteran or something like that. It was definitely a little surprising, but they have to clearly feel good about what they have, at least good enough to start the season with some of that youth, and then to see how it goes.
Can you talk about Patrick Graham and his influence on this defense? He's been a guy who I've been watching for a long time. I was kind of like, I'm actually more excited about him than McDaniels in a lot of ways, because love the way he calls a defensive game. Can you talk about his kind of impact on this defensive unit for the Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to look a little different. I think, Gus Bradley did have some success here last year, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Gus Bradley. That's a lot of cover three, which is, has its strength, but also has its pitfalls. And I think you kind of saw those throughout the course of the season. He kind of stabilized what was, the worst defense in the NFL in 2020. He definitely brought a level of stabilizing, but it just feels like with some of the versatility in Patrick Graham's schemes that they're going to be more upside. I think you're going to see a lot of different looks. You have a tandem of pass rushers now in Max Crosby and Chandler Jones that you would have to probably rate as one of the best in the league if these guys continue to do what they've been doing. I think there is another gear that Max Crosby has, and I think Chandler Jones seems spry and fresh at 32. He's been as consistent as they've come, the last decade or so. So I think it's based around, you're in a lot of ways, you're only as good as your pass rush, right? But I think there's going to be a concerted effort to get after the passer. I think you've seen the evolution of Nate Hobbs under Patrick Graham. You're going to see him, I think, be used all over the field in different situations. He's a guy that can play outside. He's a guy that can play inside. He's just like a playmaker. We'll see what Rock Ya-Sin brings to this defense, but I've liked what I've seen from him so far in camp, and I think he's kind of an underrated player after his tenure in Indy. And then you got what you have on the back end at linebacker as well. So I think you're going to see it's going to be a lot different, but it creates more upside and creates more unpredictability, which ultimately is a good thing on defense in the NFL, right?
Yeah, definitely getting away from that cover three scheme where the defense is pretty much new every down what to expect. It's going to be a breath of fresh air. We're going to be a long way from the Paul Gunther era once we see this Patrick Graham defense. But I want to talk about two guys in particular we haven't seen in the preseason, really. Divine Diablo, Denzel Perryman. Like, what are their roles in this defense going to be? I think Diablo is going to have a huge year. They're going to move him around as a chess piece, but we just haven't seen it because they haven't been out there in the preseason. But in practice, what are they looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I think them not playing in the preseason kind of tells you about how the expectations for the regular season. I think Denzel Perryman last year has a career year playing with Gus Bradley again, and you have the confidence is high coming after that season. He's in the prime of his career, and they're expecting him again to be an anchor in the middle and run support and do his thing, a little bit in coverage as well to play, to do what he did last season. Divine Diablo, I thought he came on really strong last year, flashed in coverage. We know about his history in college playing defensive back. And is somebody with a ton of upside that's going to be tapped into. I think, like you said, Ryan, he's going to be moved around a little bit, going to be asked to do some different things. And, maybe you don't have as many proven players at linebacker as you would have liked to have or as you've had in the past. But again, this is a group where they see upside, and Diablo is a big piece of that, especially in a scheme with Patrick Graham, where he's going to have the opportunity to do some different things that he might not have been asked to do last season.
Definitely. I think moving inside interior of the defensive line for a long time as Raider fans, we wanted that inside rush. And then last year we had Jefferson and we had Solomon Thomas and Darius Philon. And now it's Bilal Nichols, who's a question mark. Again, we haven't seen him, and whoever's going to be the other guy in nickel, whether that's Vickers. But how important do you think that inside rush is going to be, especially with those two guys streaming off the edge, so that teams can't just double those two guys on the outside?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be crucial. And again, it's, good thing you touched on a very different defensive tackle group this year as it was, compared to last season. But I think that's, one of the question marks. We're going to have to see how that evolves. There is a little bit of uncertainty there, and not just, with an inside pass rush, but I'm sure you want to have a presence against the run as well. I thought the run defense is something that improved throughout the course of last season, but at times it was a little leaky. You want to be shored up in the run as well as the pass. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think that's, again, an area of uncertainty just because we haven't seen that unit as a full go. You would think that the pass rush you're going to have on the outside with top end talent like Max Crosby and Chandler Jones is going to create some of those opportunities inside. There's going to be some synergy there. So it's just about seeing how that takes shape for sure.
Cool. On with Sam. Okay, yeah, another question. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask briefly about the cornerback group. Dwayne and I have talked about prior to cuts, we thought it was pretty deep. We thought there were 5 deep, probably the most depth they've had in 15 or 20 years. And then you see Mullen get traded, and Phillips, I thought, was a surprise release because I thought he showed enough to be the backup slot. And now you're looking at Robertson and Webb as your primary backups. How have those guys look throughout camp? Because, obviously they flashed enough because they didn't show a ton in game.
Well, like you said, I think, with Sam Webb in particular, I think trading Trayvon Mullen signals some confidence, would signal some confidence in him moving forward. They were going to have a decision financially to make with Trayvon Mullen coming up, right? So we know how they feel about Rock Ya-Sin. We know that Nate Hobbs was one of the best slot corners, best rookie defensive backs in the league last year, and he's continued to evolve. So this, to me, feels like towing the line about, yes, building and preparing for the future, the present, but also with some future considerations as well. So yeah, I think they're solid enough, on the perimeter, right, with Hobbs and with Rock Ya-Sin, and with some of the, it's not quite as deep. I think the Phillips cut was surprising to a lot of people, right? But it symbolizes confidence in the group that they have right now, and you are counting on young defensive backs to make a leap. That you are counting on some player development taking place, both in the short and long term. So again, I think with, especially on a Patrick Graham scheme, you want synergy. You want the pass rush to put the corners in better positions to succeed, safeties and linebackers and so on and so forth. So I think it starts up front, but again, I think they feel good enough, at least right now, what they have at corner, and then with some upside to develop moving forward.
Cool. Sam Gordon, the Las Vegas Review Journal. Two questions. I'll let you go. What do you feel like? Are the Raiders a playoff team? Can they win the division? And I did see your Twitter profile that you like hip hop. We love hip hop too. Can you give me a top three, your top three favorite artists as far as that goes?
Yeah, no doubt. First and foremost, let me answer your first question first. Regarding the playoffs, I mean, I think that's the expectation. I don't think you go and trade for Devontae Adams. I don't think you go get a Chandler Jones, two premium players at their respective positions, without having the expectation that you're going to be a playoff team. Now, that should be the expectation. I think there's more than enough there to make the playoffs. If you're talking about the talent of rosters around the AFC, I think the Raiders definitely have a top 7 roster in the conference. With that said, you're in what I believe to be the best division in football with 3 other teams that I think also qualify in the top 7 rosters. So whether are they going to make the playoffs? I don't know. I think is it going to be is 9 wins going to get you there? Is 10? We're going to find out. I think this division, all the matchups within this division are going to be must see because of how good these teams are. And Raiders and start out with one on the road against the Chargers. I think we're going to learn a lot right there. You're going to have a relatively big, meaningful measuring stick in week 1, and then we'll find out more, of course, as the season evolves. So yeah, are they a playoff caliber team? Yes, I think absolutely. I don't think there's any question about that, especially when you look at the upside that they have on the offensive side of the ball. They figure things out. You stabilize things on the offensive line. You don't need to be elite up front per se. We'll look at Cincinnati and what they accomplished, but you have to be rock solid. And if you're solid or at least a little better than you were last year, you can have, again, what I said at the top of the show, I think a top 5 offense in football. When you have a Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, you are equipped to win shootouts, not to mention a number of running backs that you can go to with complementary skill sets. You are equipped to win shootouts, and you have more upside on defense now with Patrick Graham than you did before with Gus Bradley. So yeah, they should be in the mix for the playoffs. Again, it's just the Chargers are loaded, the Chiefs are loaded, and still have Patrick Mahomes. And then I thought Denver's roster was playoff caliber last year, and you just add a quarterback who I think is being overlooked a little bit in Russell Wilson because of what he was dealing with in Seattle. So yeah, that should be the expectation. And I think they'll be in the mix all season. I just don't know if it's going to be, enough. It's a super loaded division. And I think it's going to take a while to see how things play out. As far as your second question, my top 3, I'm actually going to go see number 1 on Friday at T-Mobile Arena here in Vegas. That'll be Kendrick Lamar. Okay. Yeah, he's my favorite. Okay. He's my favorite. I mean, that's a whole conversation for another day, but I think he's the greatest of all time. I think he is. I think he is the greatest, the GOAT, and I'm looking forward to seeing him on Friday. I love Kanye West. The musical catalog of Kanye West still to this day is among my favorites, and then I would go with Nas as my third. So those are my top 3 favorite artists. Cool. Appreciate you guys asking me about that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm actually gonna go see Nas and Wu-Tang in Irvine later this month. Man, so I'm excited. I'm excited about that. All right. Thank you for joining us here on the Put On Raiders podcast. So I enjoy the podcast you have with Vinny. And then all the stuff you do with the Review Journal. Take care, man.
No, man. Appreciate you guys having me on. And thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. Thank you guys.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.